staying on this bit, it's easy.
Yeah.
A story from about as far west as you can possibly go from here, right to the edge of Cornwall. A story from Mike O'Connor. Jackie and Jan were two poor Cornish mining lads. They were so poor they couldn't afford a belt between them to keep up their trousers. The trousers were just tied up with hairy string left over from baling the hay. Now, they were poor, but they had a treat once a week, a couple of pints in the Tiddlywink at Morver. But they lived in St Just, and Morver was a 4-mile walk. But the people of St Just were so upright and religious at that time that they wouldn't have a pub in the village, so the poor lads had to walk to Morver. And they were just getting ready to go out when their mum called to them. "Do you lads know what day it is today?" "No," they said. "It's Halloween. When you get out there, all the ghosts and Cornish ghouls and old Nick himself might even be out there. So you be careful and you get back by midnight." Well, the boys agreed, anything to get out, and away they went. Down over the stream at Nancarrow, up past Buttallock, by Pendeen, skirting well round Carncanidjack, because on a dark night, strange sounds and strange lights come from the top. And eventually they get to Morver, and they're straight into the pub, couple of pints. They thoroughly enjoyed themselves. Songs and stories, mostly Halloween, people laughing and singing. It was a great night. And all of a sudden, the clock struck 12, and the boys knew they were in terrible trouble. So they ran out of the pub, down the road, and then they thought, well, we could cut 5 minutes off if we go a bit closer to Carncanidjack than we normally would. So they got off the road and across the footpath. And they'd only been going for a couple of minutes, and they heard a horse being ridden up behind them, really thundering down the path, and they could only just jump off the path in time to save themselves as it went driving by. And Jackie shouted out, "Hey, that's no way to drive a horse at this time of night." And the rider turned and came back, and he said, he'd got a long cloak on and hood right down over his face, and he said, "I'm just going up to Carncanidjack to watch the wrestling. Why don't you boys come too?" Well, there's nothing Cornish lads like better than wrestling. And it seemed the most perfect thing in the world to follow this stranger. So up they went up the side of Carncanidjack. And when they got to the top, it was flat, apart from a bank round the edge. And the crowd were all there. And the boys settled themselves down, and they realised that the crowd was all the ghosts and ghouls and goblins and old Nick sitting on a big chair. And then the wrestlers came in, and they were 10-foot-high giants. And the fighting started, and there was the breaking of bones and the tearing of sinew and the ripping of flesh. And one giant picked up the other one, and he spun him round his head and smashed him down on a big granite rock, and he lay there. And the victor went over to the devil and got his prize. And Jackie said to Jan, "Do you think we ought to go and help that one?" And Jan said, "Well, yeah, he looks in a bad way." So they scrambled down the bank and went over to where this poor giant lay. "Is he alive?" "I think so." "Do we need a doctor?" "I think it's too late for that." "Do you know any prayers?" "Well, I think I know one." And they put their hands on this poor giant, and Jan started to say, "Our Father, who art..." And at that point the hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and when they turned round, there's the ghosts and the ghouls and the goblins and old Nick himself bearing down on them.
Yeah.
And those boys watched as Nick raised his hand, raised his finger, opened his mouth to speak, but they didn't wait to see what he had got to say. They down the side of Carncanidjack, they set off round Pendeen, past Buttallock, and they were just heading for the stream at Nancarrow, knowing that if they could get across the water, Those ghosts and ghouls and goblins and old Nick wouldn't cross the water, and they were one footstep away from the bridge, and the biggest goblin got them both by the back of their trousers and was just about to bite their heads off. But Jackie and Jan were just poor mining lads. The trousers were only held up with hairy string. So that was why the boys got across the bridge, but their trousers never did. And that's the story the boys told their mother when they got home from the pub at 1 o'clock in the morning with no trousers on. Remember that one, it might just come in useful.